At 54 years old, I lay paralyzed in a hospital bed after a devastating stroke. My husband stood at the foot of the bed, suitcase in hand, and said the words I'll never forget. "The resort's already paid for, sweetheart. You just focus on healing." Then he left. He took our children, our daughter and son, and flew to the Caribbean resort I had secretly saved for, worked myself to exhaustion for, sacrificed everything for. They left me alone in that sterile room, tubes in my arms, unable to move my right side. But before their plane even landed, I made a phone call that would change everything. When they came home, sun-kissed and smiling, something was waiting for them that would wipe those smiles away forever. The September morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of the elegant kitchen in their Denver home. Margaret Chen, Maggie to those who knew her well, was preparing breakfast with the same precision she brought to everything in her life. Her hands moved efficiently, slicing vegetables for the omelet, her eyes occasionally glancing at the financial reports open on her iPad. At 54, Maggie looked strong, focused, vibrant. Her black hair, streaked with distinguished silver, was pulled back in a sleek ponytail. 3 decades of work as a senior investment advisor had shaped her into someone people respected, someone people relied on, someone people used. The sound of the shower echoed from the master bathroom. Her husband David was finally awake. Maggie poured a 3rd cup of coffee, her movements automatic. Their daughter Elena sat at the marble island, scrolling through her phone with practiced indifference. "Mom, can you Venmo me $2,000 until Friday? The agency still hasn't processed my commission, and I need to cover my Pilates membership renewal." Elena didn't look up from her screen. Maggie nodded, already opening her banking app. These requests had become so routine they barely registered anymore. Money flowing out, gratitude never flowing back. "Done," Maggie said quietly, returning to the stove. David appeared in the doorway, wearing his faded bathrobe, his hair still damp. 26 years of marriage had transformed him from an ambitious political science professor into a weary instructor at a community college, content to coast in the shadow of his wife's success. "Morning," he muttered, shuffling to his seat. "David, remember I can't drive you to campus today," Maggie said, setting plates down. "I have a client meeting at 7. David sighed but didn't argue. He never did anymore. "Fine, I'll take an Uber." Elena finally looked up. "Speaking of money, Mom, have you reconsidered helping me with the down payment on that Range Rover? Mine's practically embarrassing." "Elena, we talked about this." Maggie's voice remained even, though steel crept into her tone. "I just paid for your trip to Cabo last month." "But Mom, image matters in my industry. How am I supposed to impress luxury travel clients when I'm driving a 7-year-old car?" Elena leaned forward, her expression a perfect blend of entitlement and persuasion. Maggie looked at her daughter in silence. Elena was so much like her younger self. Ambitious, driven. But where Maggie had channeled that ambition into building something, Elena directed hers toward maintaining an appearance. "I'll think about it," Maggie finally said, knowing she would eventually give in. She always did. The front door burst open and Marcus, her youngest, rushed into the kitchen. At 27, he was a perpetual dreamer, a collector of law degrees and abandoned careers. He'd graduated from law school 3 years ago and had already cycled through 4 firms. Currently, he worked as a contract attorney at a small practice, always chasing the next big opportunity. "Hey, everyone," he announced, kissing his mother's cheek. "Mom, you're amazing." "Got the transfer. Already cleared out my desk at the old place. Starting at a new firm Monday." "Again, Marcus?" Maggie's voice held exhaustion. "We agreed you'd stay somewhere for at least 6 months." "Mom, that place was dead end. This new firm, they're talking about bringing me on as a junior partner within a year. Real litigation work, not just document review." Marcus spoke rapidly, the way he always did when justifying his impulsive decisions. Maggie shook her head, checking her watch. "I need to go. I'll be home late tonight. Board meeting." She quickly drained her coffee, gathered her leather portfolio, straightened her tailored blazer. "David, don't forget to run the dishwasher and defrost the salmon. Elena, water the garden. Marcus, take out the recycling." Standard morning instructions. Standard nods in response. Maggie knew half of these tasks would go undone, and she'd handle them herself later, like she always did. The entire day at the investment firm on 17th Street, where Maggie worked as senior portfolio manager, dissolved into back-to-back meetings and conference calls. After lunch, her niece's school called about attendance issues. Maggie promised to talk to her sister. Then she had to handle an overdraft notice for Marcus. The credit union had sent a warning letter. That evening, riding the light rail home, Maggie scrolled through resort photos on her phone. The idea had started 2 weeks ago when she'd seen an advertisement for St. Lucia. Crystal blue water, pristine beaches, oceanfront villas. The last time the whole family had vacationed together was 4 years ago. And even then, it was just a quick trip to Sedona because David hated long flights. I want to give them something special, Maggie thought, studying the images of the luxury resort. Marcus will settle down, Elena will mature, and David and I, maybe we can remember who we used to be. The house was empty when she arrived. A note from David lay on the counter. Went to faculty mixer. Home late. The salmon was still frozen. The garden was dry. The recycling bin sat full. Maggie mechanically completed the chores, ate leftover soup standing at the counter, then opened her laptop. Until after midnight, she worked on a financial projection for the next 5 months. If she cut back everywhere, took on additional consulting projects, postponed the planned kitchen remodel, they could afford St. Lucia by April. All she had to do was work 7 days a week for the next 4 months, and so her relentless pursuit began. Up at 5 in the morning to finish household tasks before work, home at 10 at night with extra projects, weekends spent hunched over her computer. The rare phone calls came only with demands. Mom, where's my blazer? Maggie, I can't find any clean towels. Mom, can you send another 100 for a cab? By March, Maggie had finalized everything. She'd booked an oceanfront villa, the largest available, with 3 bedrooms and a private pool. She'd paid for the flights, travel insurance, airport transfers, all for the joy she imagined seeing on their faces when she announced the surprise in early April. With everything secured and paid for, Maggie gathered the family. I have a surprise, she said, watching their confused faces. In May, we're flying to St. Lucia for 2 weeks. The reaction exceeded every expectation. Elena shrieked and rushed to hug her mother. Marcus was skeptical at first, then frantically pulled up the resort on his phone. Even David smiled, awkwardly embracing Maggie. That's incredible, he stammered. Can we actually afford this? I've calculated everything, Maggie smiled, savoring the rare moment of family unity. The next 8 weeks vanished in a blur of preparation. Elena constantly bought new beachwear and resort outfits, endlessly asking her mother's opinion. Marcus enthusiastically researched diving excursions and island tours. David, overcoming his flight anxiety, studied reviews and watched videos about the Caribbean. And Maggie worked. The new consulting project proved more demanding than anticipated. Management wanted results. Clients changed requirements. Late-night video conferences, mounting pressure, chronic sleep deprivation. But she endured, knowing soon they would all be together, happy beside the ocean. A week before departure, Elena approached her with an unexpected request. Mom, can I bring Jordan? You know, the guy I've been seeing. He'll buy his own ticket. He just needs space in our villa. Maggie struggled to control her frustration. Elena, this is a family vacation. Besides, the villa only accommodates 4 people. But Mom, we've been together for 8 months. He's practically family now. Elena's lower lip jutted out the same way it had when she was demanding candy as a child. No, Maggie said firmly. And that's final. Elena stormed out, slamming her bedroom door. She maintained demonstrative silence through dinner. David, predictably, avoided getting involved in the conflict between his wife and daughter. Marcus was too absorbed in planning activities to notice the family tension. 3 days before their flight, on a Thursday morning, Maggie woke feeling like her head was filled with concrete. Nausea roiled in her stomach. Her right arm felt strange, tingly. Just exhausted, she thought. It'll pass. She struggled out of bed, careful not to wake David. In the bathroom, Maggie splashed cold water on her face and studied her reflection. Pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, new lines that hadn't been there a month ago. It's fine. I'll rest in St. Lucia, she thought, reaching for pain medication. She only had to make it 3 more days. But fate had different plans. That May morning, Maggie had planned to make a celebration breakfast. With only 3 days until their flight, she wanted to build excitement for the trip. Biscuits for David, French toast for Elena, breakfast burritos for Marcus. Something special for everyone. Maggie was carefully slicing peppers when she felt the knife slip from her suddenly numb fingers. A strange sensation spread through her entire right arm, then her leg. Maggie tried to steady herself against the counter, but her body refused to respond. Everything swam before her eyes. "David!" she tried to call out, but her voice came out distorted. "Wrong." Maggie attempted to take a step toward the doorway and collapsed onto the tile floor, knocking over a chair. The crash woke David. "What the hell? Maggie?" He rushed into the kitchen in his unbuttoned pajamas and froze, seeing his wife on the floor. "God, what happened?" Maggie wanted to answer, but her tongue felt thick and uncooperative. She could only stare at her husband, trying to convey the terror and pain that had seized her body. "Call 911. Now." David frantically searched for his phone, stumbling into furniture. "Don't move." "You'll be okay." Noise came from Elena's room. "What's all that commotion this early?" she asked groggily, appearing in the doorway. "Your mom collapsed." "Call 911 now," David shouted, kneeling beside his wife. Elena, seeing her mother on the floor, pressed her hands to her mouth in horror. "Mom, what's wrong?" "I don't know." "Just call the damn ambulance!" The next several minutes merged into chaos for Maggie. Panicked screams, hands trying to lift her, Marcus's voice as he rushed into the kitchen. "What? How? When did this happen?" Consciousness flickered in and out. The ambulance arrived in 11 minutes. A young paramedic quickly assessed the situation. "Appears to be a stroke. We need immediate transport," he said calmly, directing his partner. "Who's riding with her?" "I am." David stepped forward. "She's my wife." Maggie was carefully transferred onto the gurney. At the last moment, already at the door, she found the strength to weakly squeeze Elena's hand as if trying to say, "Don't worry. I'll be okay." In the hospital emergency room, everything happened quickly. The attending neurologist, a stern woman with short gray hair, rapidly examined Maggie. Clear signs of ischemic stroke, immediate CT scan and transfer to intensive care. Maggie's gurney disappeared through double doors, leaving a devastated David alone in the hallway. He sank into a plastic chair, covering his face with his hands. The phone in his pocket vibrated constantly. Elena and Marcus were demanding updates. The doctor emerged 2 hours later. "Are you Margaret Chen's husband?" "Yes." David jumped up. "How is she?" "Ischemic stroke affecting the middle cerebral artery. Her condition is critical but stable. We administered clot-busting medication and performed initial interventions. She's in the ICU now. The next 24 hours are crucial. Will she survive?" David's voice shook. "The prognosis is cautiously optimistic. It's fortunate she was brought in so quickly. However, she faces a long and difficult recovery. Right-sided paralysis, speech impairment. Physical therapy will be extensive." The doctor's words made David feel like the ground was disappearing beneath him. "You can see her. Tomorrow, if her condition stabilizes." David returned home that evening, exhausted from hours of hospital waiting and paperwork. Elena and Marcus met him in the hallway. "Well, what did they say?" Elena was pale, her eyes red from crying. "Stroke," David replied tiredly, removing his jacket. "A severe one. She's in intensive care." "Oh my God," Elena whispered. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked. "When will she be discharged?" "I don't know, son." David walked into the kitchen, mechanically turning on the electric kettle. The knife Maggie had dropped still lay on the floor. The unfinished vegetables sat on the cutting board. Time had stopped here. Marcus rubbed his forehead. "What about St. Lucia? The flight is in 3 days." David and Elena stared at him in disbelief. "What about St. Lucia?" Elena snapped. "Don't you understand? Mom had a stroke." "I understand," Marcus shot back. But everything's paid for. Everything's booked? Mom worked so hard for this. I'm just wondering what we do with the reservations. David collapsed heavily into a chair. I don't know. I'll have to look at the documents. Maybe we can recover some of the money. The next 3 days were spent in hospital corridors. Maggie was moved from intensive care to a regular room, but she faced months of recovery ahead. Her right side was largely paralyzed, her speech severely impaired. But her mind was clear, which the doctor said was an encouraging sign. On the 4th day after the incident, David, Elena, and Marcus entered the hospital room together. Maggie raised herself slightly on her pillows at their arrival. Pale, drawn, with a distant look in her eyes, this woman seemed a shadow of the strong, energetic Maggie she'd once been. Hi, she managed to say softly, the single word requiring visible effort. How are you feeling? David sat on the edge of the bed, but instead of flowers or magazines, he held a leather document folder. Rehab. Will take at least 6 months, Maggie answered slowly, her words slurred. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Elena nervously fidgeted with the strap of her designer handbag, a birthday gift from her mother. Mom, we've been talking, Elena finally began. About the St. Lucia trip. Yes, it has to be. Postponed, Maggie replied with effort. Actually, David cleared his throat, avoiding his wife's direct gaze. Margaret, we spoke with the travel agent. Rescheduling or canceling would cost almost the full amount. We'd basically be throwing the money away. Maggie felt ice spread through her veins. What are you suggesting? Every syllable was a battle, but she needed to understand what her husband was implying. The trip's already paid for, sweetheart. You just focus on healing. David attempted a smile, but it looked guilty. The kids and I will go as planned. You need rest and treatment right now. And us going? Well, it would be wasteful to lose all that money. Maggie stared at them, unable to believe what she was hearing. She was paralyzed after a stroke, and they were preparing to fly off to the resort she had paid for with her own money. Who will stay with me? Was all she could ask. We arranged everything with Mrs. Kim, the neighbor, Marcus quickly supplied. She'll check in every day. And you have nurses and doctors here? You're in good hands, Mom. David placed the folder on the bedside table. This is a power of attorney document for managing your accounts. We'll need access to cash for spending money and expenses there. Excursions, you know. Everything in St. Lucia is expensive. Maggie stared silently at the ceiling, feeling a treacherous tear roll down her cheek. Her entire life had been devoted to them, saving for emergencies, denying herself small pleasures. And this was her reward. Will you sign it? David held out a pen. Her hand barely responded, but Maggie found the strength to take it. Of course, she whispered, and signed the document with shaky, uneven handwriting. What else could she do? 'Cause a scene in her condition? Forbid them from going? They would do as they pleased anyway. She had no strength left to fight. When they left, discussing which swimsuits to pack, Maggie stared out the window at the blooming cherry tree in the hospital courtyard. The room was quiet except for the beeping of monitors. Outside, leaves rustled gently. Laughter drifted from somewhere distant. Life continued, but for Maggie, it seemed frozen in this sterile room with the smell of antiseptic. Mrs. Kim came by that evening, a kind, elderly Korean woman in her late 70s. Carrying a container of homemade kimchi jjigae, Margaret. Dear? She lamented, seeing her neighbor. What on earth happened? The moment I heard, I came straight over. David had stopped by earlier, she explained, saying they had an urgent family obligation and asking if she could look in on Maggie. Urgent family obligation. Maggie laughed bitterly to herself. What a convenient story for the old lady. Thank you, Mrs. Kim, Maggie managed with difficulty. You shouldn't have. Nonsense. We're neighbors, aren't we? Mrs. Kim waved her hand, settling into a chair. I brought you proper soup and some rice porridge. That hospital food is terrible. The elderly woman talked endlessly, sharing neighborhood gossip, stories about her grandchildren, updates about the community garden. Maggie listened absently. The inner coldness that had settled after the conversation with her family wouldn't subside. The next day, Nurse Patricia Williams, a woman around Maggie's age with compassionate but tired eyes, entered the room. "How are we feeling today, Mrs. Chen?" she asked, checking the IV line. Maggie wanted to answer fine, but instead unexpectedly burst into tears. They streamed down her cheeks and she couldn't stop them. "What's wrong?" the nurse asked with concern, sitting beside her. Stuttering and pausing, Maggie told her everything. The trip she'd planned for the whole family. The betrayal of her husband and children flying to St. Lucia while she lay paralyzed. The power of attorney. "I didn't even look at what I signed," she finished. Nurse Patricia frowned, picked up the folder from the table and studied the document carefully. Suddenly she inhaled sharply. "Mrs. Chen, this is a general power of attorney over all your assets. Not just accounts. Real estate, investments, everything. They can control everything you own." Maggie felt the room spin. How could they? Had they only ever seen her as an ATM, a source of comfort throughout all those years of her dedication? The magnitude of the betrayal made it hard to breathe. "We need to address this immediately," Nurse Patricia said decisively. "Do you have someone you trust? A lawyer or notary?" Maggie thought for a moment, then remembered Harrison Cole, a corporate attorney she'd worked with at the investment firm years ago. They'd maintained a professional friendship, occasionally running into each other at industry events. Gathering all her strength, she dictated the phone number to the nurse. "Thank you," Maggie whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you. You focus on getting well." Nurse Patricia gently squeezed her hand. "We'll handle this." That evening, Mrs. Kim visited again, bringing fresh fruit and news. "Your family left for their trip, Margaret. I saw the taxi pick them up from the building this morning. Loaded up all their luggage, smiling and laughing. David told me you gave them your blessing so the money wouldn't go to waste. You're such a generous woman, thinking of your family even in this condition." Maggie closed her eyes so the neighbor wouldn't see the pain reflected in them. "Gave them my blessing. What convenient phrasing. Thank you for coming," was all she could say. Maggie couldn't sleep that night. Muted sounds of hospital activity filtered through the doorway. Nurses' footsteps, the beeping of monitors, distant voices. And somewhere high above in the dark sky, a plane was carrying her family toward warm seas and white sand beaches. How could I have been so blind? She thought, staring at the ceiling. So many years living with people and never seeing their true faces. So many years giving everything and receiving nothing in return. For the first time in years, Maggie felt utterly alone. And in that isolation, in the silence of the hospital room bathed in light from the street lamp outside, a decision formed that would change her entire future. The next day, as morning sun barely pierced through the hospital blinds, a quiet knock came at the door. Maggie painfully turned her head. Harrison Cole stood in the doorway, a tall, distinguished man in his early 60s with neatly trimmed silver hair. He carried a leather briefcase and a small bouquet of white lilies. "Good morning, Mrs. Chen," he said, pausing at the threshold. "May I come in?" "Harrison?" Maggie tried to smile, but it came out as a weak grimace. "Thank you for coming." The attorney approached, placed the flowers in a pitcher of water, and sat in the chair beside the bed. His attentive gaze swept the room, noting the absence of other flowers, cards, or any sign of family visits. "Your nurse called me." She explained the situation. He spoke calmly, without excessive pity, which Maggie especially appreciated. Pity felt unbearable right now. "I brought the necessary documents. Where is this power of attorney in question?" Maggie weakly nodded toward the bedside table. Harrison took the folder, examined its contents carefully, and shook his head. Indeed, a general power of attorney with extensive powers. The right to control all your personal and real property, bank accounts, investment portfolios. He frowned. "Who prepared this document?" "My husband," Maggie said with difficulty. "I thought as much," the attorney nodded. "There are significant flaws in the execution. First, there's no proper witness or notarization present, which already casts doubt on the document's legitimacy. Second, it lacks the detailed scope of authority that's mandatory for this type of POA. He pulled forms from his briefcase and laid them out on the movable table. We will immediately draft a statement of revocation. Then we'll prepare notices for all financial institutions to freeze operations on your accounts until the circumstances are clarified. Nurse Patricia appeared in the doorway with a tray holding cups of tea and a plate of crackers. I figured you could use some refreshment, she smiled, placing the tray on the table. How's it going? We are proceeding with the restoration of justice, Harrison replied, nodding gratefully to the nurse. Mrs. Chen, I need details. Which institutions should I notify? Do you have safe deposit boxes? Any property other than your primary residence? For the next hour, Maggie, overcoming her speech difficulties, slowly and thoroughly answered the attorney's questions. Nurse Patricia helped when a complex name or number was particularly hard to pronounce. Harrison methodically filled out the forms, occasionally clarifying details. We will revoke the power of attorney today, he stated decisively, finishing his documentation. If I may offer advice, it's time to review other legal documents, specifically your will. Maggie paused. She'd written her will years ago, before Marcus was born. Back then, it was straightforward. Her husband and children received equal shares of her estate. The document hadn't been reviewed since. Yes, she said firmly after a pause. I want to. Change the will. Harrison looked at her intently. Are you certain? This is a serious decision, especially in your condition. Exactly. In my condition, Maggie countered, mastering her unruly tongue. I see, more clearly than ever. The attorney nodded. Very well. Let's discuss the details. While Maggie's family was boarding their plane, not bothering to call the hospital, she, with her attorney's help, not only revoked the power of attorney, but also drafted a new will. The majority of her estate was now allocated to a neurological rehabilitation foundation assisting stroke patients, as well as a substantial bequest to Patricia Williams, who in just days had shown more care than her own family had in years. Maggie also arranged for the creation of a research grant to support young rehabilitation specialists. Are you certain about this? Harrison asked cautiously, finalizing the documents. Absolutely, Maggie answered firmly, feeling a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, she was making a decision based solely on herself and her own wishes. Nurse Patricia, upon learning about the will, shook her head resolutely. Mrs. Chen, I can't accept this. We've only just met. You are the only person who has shown care, Maggie said slowly but clearly. Please, accept it as a symbol of my gratitude. Harrison packed the documents into his briefcase. Now, for the practical steps. I'll send notifications to all financial institutions where you hold accounts. I'll block any real estate transactions in your name. I'll establish legal protection for your assets throughout your rehabilitation period. Maggie nodded gratefully. Thank you. My pleasure. The attorney stood, preparing to leave. I'll visit regularly. We'll monitor the situation together. When he left, Nurse Patricia helped Maggie adjust to a more comfortable position in bed. How are you feeling? Strange, Maggie admitted. Like I just woke up from a long sleep. That's a good sign. The nurse smiled. It means recovery has begun, and not just the physical kind. That evening, as Maggie was drifting toward sleep, the phone on the bedside table vibrated quietly. She managed to reach for it with her good hand. David's name appeared on the screen. With a composure that surprised even herself, Maggie pressed the answer button. Yes? Sweetheart, it's me. David's voice sounded nervous, strained. We're at the resort. There's a problem with payment. The card isn't working for some reason. Maggie remained silent, listening to her husband's anxious breathing on the other end. Are you hearing me? He asked after a pause. We need to pay for upgrades and some excursions. The card says declined. Unfortunately. No, Maggie answered, calmly, surprised at how clear her voice suddenly sounded. The power of attorney has been revoked, and I have, generally revised, our financial relationship. What do you mean revised? David's voice edged into panic. We're at the resort. We need money. You have your own cards and your own savings. Maggie was amazed at the serenity in her voice. Enjoy your vacation on your own dime. Margaret, you're not well. This is the stroke talking. You need therapy, David shouted, but she had already pressed the end call button. The phone immediately rang again. Then again. Notifications about messages popped up. First from David, then Elena, then Marcus. Maggie silenced the phone and placed it face down. For the first time in years, she didn't rush to solve someone else's problems. In the morning, she was awakened by raised voices in the hallway. It sounded like David was trying to force his way into the room, but the duty nurse was blocking him. You don't understand. She's my wife. His indignant voice carried through the door. She's made an irrational decision. She's not herself. Visiting hours are strictly 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., the nurse replied, unperturbed. And according to our records, the patient's condition is stable with positive progress. If you wish to speak with her, please return during visiting hours. The footsteps receded. Silence fell. Maggie closed her eyes, feeling the tension of the past several days finally release. She didn't know if they'd ultimately taken the trip or not, and for the first time she didn't care. At noon, Nurse Patricia appeared. You have a visitor. May I let him in? Maggie tensed, thinking David had returned, but Harrison Cole appeared in the doorway. All documents are executed. Notifications have been sent, he announced without preamble. Your accounts are secured. Your property is protected. Now you can focus on your recovery. Thank you, Maggie said sincerely. What about my family? According to my information, they did proceed with the trip, the attorney replied. Your husband had to use his own credit card to cover the additional expenses. Maggie nodded. Strangely, the news didn't cause pain. Only relief. Now that the decision had been made, she could move forward. I contacted a colleague who specializes in rehabilitation, Harrison continued. He's ready to oversee your recovery program. Excellent physician. Trained in Switzerland. I'm not sure if I can afford it. Right now, Maggie stammered, thinking about her frozen accounts. Don't worry about that, the attorney smiled. You have sufficient funds in a trust account that wasn't included in the power of attorney. Furthermore, your insurance covers a significant portion of rehabilitation. The next 2 weeks, Maggie devoted entirely to recovery. With the same determination she'd once used to build her career, she now fought to regain her mobility and speech. Nurse Patricia helped her with exercises, brought her books on neuroplasticity, and provided support whenever Maggie felt like giving up. The rehabilitation specialist, Dr. Nathan Cross, was demanding but highly effective. Listen, Mrs. Chen, he would say, helping her perform complex exercises for her right hand. The brain has remarkable ability to heal itself, but it requires 2 things, consistent practice and positive mindset. I can provide the first, the second is entirely up to you, and Maggie tried. Every day she performed all prescribed exercises, forcing her reluctant muscles to work. With the help of a speech pathologist, she trained her voice, repeating complex phrases. In the evenings, she read aloud, recording herself to track progress. Harrison visited regularly, helping sort out legal matters. They transferred all her accounts to a new institution, changed passwords and access codes, prepared documents for the division of property. Are you sure about divorce? He asked one day, filling out another form. Perhaps you should wait until you're fully recovered. No, Maggie replied firmly. Any trace of her former uncertainty had vanished from her voice. It's precisely now when I'm physically weak that I need legal protection. The attorney nodded understandingly. A wise decision. There was no news from the family. Maggie's phone remained silent. No calls, no messages. Sometimes she looked at photos of the St. Lucia resort online, imagining them sunbathing, swimming in turquoise water, enjoying themselves. Strangely, these thoughts didn't cause bitterness, only quiet determination to follow her own path. The day before the family's scheduled return, Maggie was transferred from the hospital to a rehabilitation center. The room was bright and spacious with large windows overlooking a park. Harrison personally accompanied her during the transfer, ensuring all paperwork was in order. "You'll be comfortable here," he said, helping her settle in. "And most importantly, you'll receive professional treatment." Maggie looked at him gratefully. "I don't know how to thank you for your help." "You already have," the attorney smiled. "With your tenacity and will to live. You know, Mrs. Chen, I've seen many people in crisis. Most of them break. You're one of the rare few who emerge stronger." That same evening, Mrs. Kim called, agitated and confused. "Margaret, dear, I don't know what to think. Your family came back from their trip and they can't get into the condo. The locks have been changed. David called me asking if I knew what was happening. I told him I had no idea and that you were still recovering." "It's all right, Mrs. Kim," Maggie replied calmly. "It's supposed to be that way, but what about them? Where will they stay?" "Elena has her own apartment," Maggie reminded her. "And Marcus does too. David can stay with the children." "Oh, Margaret!" Mrs. Kim was clearly bewildered. "What happened between you all?" "Just life," Maggie answered. "Sometimes it teaches unexpected lessons." An hour later, the phone erupted in furious ringing. It was David. Maggie stared at the screen for a long time, deciding whether to answer. Finally, she pressed the button. "Hello? What is happening?" Her husband's outraged voice burst into the quiet room. "They won't let us into the house." "That is no longer your house," she replied calmly. "I filed for divorce. You can stay with the children. They have their own places, which incidentally were purchased with my money. Margaret, you're not well. This is the stroke talking." "You need therapy," David shouted. "On the contrary, I am finally myself," Maggie replied, feeling her voice grow steadier. "And yes, the stroke certainly clarified a lot. You can't do this to us. We're your family." "Family?" Maggie laughed bitterly. "Family doesn't abandon a loved one in the hospital for a vacation. Family doesn't deceive with powers of attorney. Family supports you in distress, rather than thinking of their own advantage." "Margaret, listen," David started. "All the documents are with my attorney," she interrupted. "He will contact you to discuss the divorce terms." Maggie pressed the end call button and turned off her phone. A calming silence settled in the room. Outside the window, the sunset began, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Maggie looked at this beauty, feeling a strange serenity. For the first time in many years, she was completely in control of her life and her future. And although months of difficult rehabilitation and legal battles lay ahead, she knew she would prevail. She slept without medication that night. She didn't dream of nightmares about illness and betrayal. She dreamed of the ocean, vast, calm, with gentle waves rolling onto white sand. She stood on the shore, strong, healthy, free, watching the dawn paint the horizon in soft colors. A new day, a new life, and she was ready for this journey. 6 months later, the morning sun streaming through sheer curtains woke Maggie before her alarm. She had been living in her new apartment for half a year, and every morning began the same way, with a feeling of freedom and peace. Maggie rose slowly from bed. Her right leg was still slightly stiff in the mornings, but it grew stronger every day. She set aside her cane, preferring to go without it at home, training her balance. She walked to the window. Life bustled below. Young parents with strollers heading to the park. Elderly neighbors settling on benches. Joggers out for their morning runs. Maggie smiled at her reflection in the window. She had changed significantly over the past months, not just internally, but externally. She had traded her severe business style for a softer, more natural look. She had abandoned rigid schedules for a more balanced life. Even her posture was different, more relaxed yet confident. The phone rang. Nurse Patricia's name lit up the screen. "Good morning. Are you ready for the big day?" "As ready as anyone can be for opening their own center," Maggie replied with slight nervousness. "I'm a little anxious." "That's normal," Patricia reassured her. "I'll pick you up at 10. Everything's ready. Just final touches left. Today was special." The opening of the New Beginning Center for Stroke Survivors, co-founded by Maggie and Patricia. What had started as a modest idea for a support group had blossomed into a full organization with office space, trained staff, and ambitious plans. Later that day, standing before the gathered crowd of patients, caregivers, and supporters, Maggie felt a profound sense of purpose. "Good afternoon. Dear friends," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I'm honored to welcome you to the New Beginning Center. A year ago, I suffered a severe stroke. That event divided my life into before and after." She looked around the room, seeing understanding in every face. "The stroke took much from me. My health, my familiar way of life, my illusions about family. But it also gave me something priceless, a new perspective on life, true friends, and an understanding of what truly matters." She smiled, glancing at Patricia standing by the wall. "Our center exists not just for physical rehabilitation, though that's vital. We're here to help you return to a full life with new priorities, new understanding of yourself and the world around you, to support you in moments of despair, and share the joy of small victories." The applause that filled the room touched Maggie deeply. For the first time, she felt genuine acknowledgement, not for her money, not for her position, but for something she had truly created herself, investing her soul and experience. That evening, sitting on the balcony of her apartment with a cup of tea, Maggie thought about the strange irony of fate. She had lost her health and her family in the conventional sense, but she had gained something far more valuable: self-respect, a new calling, and the understanding that life doesn't end at 54. Even after a stroke, it can be fulfilling, meaningful, and belong first and foremost to herself. Daily, helping other stroke survivors find the strength to recover, Maggie often said, "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you truly need." And she smiled, watching the despair in her listeners' eyes slowly fade, replaced by the same fire of determination that had once saved her. Thus, a devastating illness and the betrayal of her closest loved ones became for Margaret Chen not an ending, but the beginning of a new, more conscious and authentic life. A life that had room for pain and difficulty, but also for joy, discovery, and true deep love. Most importantly, love for herself. Did this story touch your heart? Are you listening from Seattle, Miami, Chicago, or somewhere else? Let's connect in the comments below. If this story moved you, please consider supporting the channel with a super thanks so I can continue bringing you more powerful, life-changing stories like this one. Your comments mean everything to me. Share your thoughts, your own experiences, or just let me know you were here. On screen, you'll see 2 more incredible life stories I highly recommend. There's so much more waiting for you on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. See you in the next one. With love and respect.